This is part 3 of learning the instructions of God. We are going over the commandments of God that it was given to the people at Mount Sinai. Part of this teaching is to go through each and every one of the commandments that would apply to the average person today. At the end of this, we will land on a final number. The rabbis will have you think that there are 613. And we cover this, they make up that number. It comes from a gematria number. And so there are not 613 commandments. It's actually quite smaller number than that. And we will find out what that number is if you continue to stay with this series. So why don't we jump right in? So we pick up with number 53. That is Exodus 23, verse 3. And this one deals with do not favor the poor. This is very important because there is a lot of people out there who want to be all about the poor. There's even some political groups out there that only focus on the poor. That's their sticking point. We're for the poor people, poor people, poor people. But you're not supposed to show partiality to them. And this particular verse points that out. There's also a verse that talks about not to show favoritism to the rich. So God's about balance. Don't be all in for the poor. Don't be all in for the rich. You got to have balance. So this verse goes, you shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. So if there is some sort of court case or an argument, you don't just take sides just because the person's poor and they would favor them more. That is injustice. Number 54 is Exodus 23, verse 4. Return the animals. And it states, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. So this is all about loving your neighbor, even your enemies. If your enemy lost his sheep or donkey or whatever his animal is, and you happen to find it, you're supposed to go give it to him. And you're supposed to take care of it. Make sure it gets there. Because it's all about love. Loving your neighbor is what Jesus said to do. Number 55, Exodus 23, verse 5. On helping unload when necessary a tired animal. So this is kind of like be kind to animals. Don't be a tyrant over your animals. And the verse states, if you see the donkey of the one who hates you lying under it, its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. So if you see an animal struggling and you're just sitting back laughing, maybe it's entertaining, that is wrong. You're supposed to get in there and help it and be kind to an animal. Number 56, Exodus 23, verse 6. A judge is not to discriminate against the poor. So we have the flip side of the coin. So you do not show partiality or favoritism to the poor. And now here in this verse it states, you shall not wrest the judgment of your poor in his cause. So just because they're not on the same socioeconomic status means you don't pile it on to them. You don't decide against them. You don't treat them wrong. So you don't treat them with disdain because they're poor. And there are other verses that come in about taking care of the poor. Number 57, Exodus 23, verse 7. No conviction based on circumstantial evidence alone. And it states, keep yourself far from a false matter. I mean, stay away from the lies and gossip, whatever. Do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. So we are to have clear-cut evidence when we have some sort of court case. And if the wicked don't get their punishment in this world, they will get them in the next. Number 58, Exodus 23, verse 8. A judge is not to accept bribes or gifts. The verse states, and you shall take no bribe for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. We're also, just in general, people are not supposed to take bribes biblically or blackmail or any of that stuff. You're not supposed to be doing that. And of course, the judges as well. Number 59, Exodus 23, verse 9. Do not oppress the stranger. This is a very important one. Foreign people that have come into your land and they've moved in and they're looking for shelter. It's a very Hebraic thing to welcome in strangers and treat them good with food and drink and be hospitable. Which it states, also you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. God is reminding them that they were once strangers. So don't forget where you came from. Number 60, Exodus 23, verse 19, Canaanite worship. This pops up very often, and this is a very big subject that we're dealing with on this particular verse, which it states, the first of the fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. It's talking about when they came into the land, they need to present first fruits to God. That verse, that's dealing with the temple or tabernacle at the time, but it's the second part of this verse that we are interested in, because it states, you shall not boil a kid or a young goat in its mother's milk. And so what the rabbis have done over the course of history is they said this particular commandment of not to boil a kid, i.e. a goat, in its mother's milk, it means three different things for each time it's mentioned, because it's in the Bible 3 times. So each time it's a more severe separation. So, and now in some sects of Judaism, they won't even put cheese on a hamburger, and they won't even have plates be for meat and cheese. They have to be separate plates. They have to have separate kitchens, separate sinks, all that. And they have to be separated from any dairy to meat. And they won't even eat those foods within 45 minutes of each other to make sure they don't touch in someone's stomach. Now, that is not what this Bible verse is about. What this Bible verse is about the Canaanite worship. So it was a fertility ritual that they would boil a kid, a baby goat, in its mother's milk. And that was very evil. And they would eat it. And, something that was meant for nourishment of babies, which is milk, is used as the mechanism to kill a goat. That's just disgusting. And then eat it. And actually, there are tribes that still do this ritual to this day. So the Bible's not saying you can't enjoy big, fat, juicy cheeseburger. What the Bible is saying here, in particular God, he's saying, do not do that Canaanite fertility ritual that the Canaanites are doing in the land. You specifically stay away from that. Number 61, Exodus 30. And we're going to have to look at some other verses to get the context of this one. But the verse that we want is verse 32. So this is dealing with the anointing oil of the temple. Now, we've included this verse because it's talking about the anointing oil. And so you'll see why this temple oil has been included in this list. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, this shall be a holy anointing oil to me throughout your generations. Here's verse 32. It shall not be poured on man's flesh, nor shall you make any other like it according to its composition. It is holy, and it shall be holy to you. Who, and this is verse 33 to help with it, whoever compounds any like it, or whoever puts any of it on an outsider shall be cut off from his people. So the reason why this verse is so important is because there are actually people out there who read about the temple oil and then they say, hey, I want that. I want to use that for myself. I want to anoint my house with it. I want to anoint other people with it. When it specifically says not to do that, it's a direct violation of God's commandments to make yourself this anointing oil, which was to be made by the Levites, and the Levites were the ones to use it on the anointing of the menorah or the altar or any of the utensils used in the processes of the temple. So this is not everyday common use. This is not for the people. This is just for the temple. And we are not to be making this oil for ourselves and to just use it for our pleasure. Number 62, Exodus 30, verse 37. This is dealing with the incense and the temple. This is in the same vein of what we were just talking about. But as for the incense which you shall make, you shall not make any for yourselves according to the composition. It shall be to you holy for the Lord. Whoever makes any like it, to smell it, he shall be cut off from his people. So it's the same thing with the incense. It was a special blend, it was a special purpose to be used only in the temple, and it's not for the people. It's not for common people. It's not for us to put in our houses and to make it smell nice. You can do that with any other smells, but God is saying, you don't do this one. So you would be violating it if you tried to recreate it. Number 63, Exodus 34, verse 6, not to boil a goat in its mother's milk. This is the same thing. It's the same reiteration. This is the second time we mentioned this. It's a Canaanite fertility ritual, which it states, you shall not kill a kid in its mother's milk. So the last verse talked about boiling a young goat in its mother's milk. This one adds in that you're killing it in the milk as well. So very disgusting stuff. Number 64, Exodus 35, verse 3, strenuous work with fire. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. Now, out of context, this verse would appear that you cannot have any fire in your homes on the Sabbath. But in the context of the chapter, this verse is talking about doing strenuous work for your job. And so in ancient times, they would use fire for all kinds of things. And it was a long process. You have to go out into the wilderness. You have to chop down wood. You have to gather up wood, and then you have to carry it all the way back, and you have to chop it smaller. And so it's a very strenuous thing. Also, many jobs were wrapped up around fire, and fire was used in making the temple instruments. And so God is telling them, I don't want you to be working on the temple instruments, i.e., the menorah, the Ark of the Covenant, the altars. I don't want you to be working on those because that chapter is dealing with that. Plus, if you go into the New Testament, you can see people are eating and they are carrying torches. They were using oil lamps and they were using fire to keep themselves warm. It's not forbidden that you can't keep yourself warm and cook food. What this verse is dealing with is, hey, you should be resting and not doing strenuous things. Number 65, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 1. Anyone aware of evidence must come to the court to testify. We talked about this briefly just before, but this is the verse that you are responsible for putting out there the truth. You're responsible for bringing forth the evidence that you saw. And the verse states, and if a soul sin and hear the voice of swearing and is a witness whether he has seen or know of it, if he does not say it, then he shall bear iniquity. So basically, if you witness a crime and you don't come forward, you just hide away and you stay secret, you will have sin on you. So you are responsible for being a good upright citizen, helping with justice. They don't teach that in today's world, do they? Number 66, Leviticus chapter 6, verse 4, on a robber to restore the stolen article to its owner, in which it states, "It shall be because he has sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore that which he took violently away, or the thing which he has deceitfully taken, or that delivered him to keep, or to the lost thing which he had found." So he is supposed to make restitution if he stole something. Number 67, Leviticus 7, verse 19. Not to eat meat of consecrated things that have become unclean, in which it states, "And the flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burnt with fire, and as for the flesh, all that is clean shall eat thereof." So this verse is talking about if you have meat that somehow became unclean, you're not to eat it. You shall burn it up. The clean stuff, you shall eat that. This verse is very important because it's stating that you are to eat clean foods. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but that's what it's saying. And even if your animal is clean that you're about to eat, let's say I have some fresh steak and my fresh steak accidentally falls on something dead. Let's say a dead dog. It just fell off my bowl onto a dead dog. Well, a dead animal is considered unclean. So now my steak is unclean. Doesn't matter if I wash it off. I have to cook it in fire and burn it because it is contaminated. And why would you risk something like that? The backdrop behind God telling you what is clean and unclean as far as food is that he wants to keep you safe. It's all about safety. The unclean animals are not safe. They have worms. They don't have clean digestive systems, and they can get you sick. Number 68, Leviticus 7:23, not to eat certain types of fat of the clean animal, which it states, "Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, you shall eat no manner of fat." That is, the Hebrew word there is organ fat. And you need to know that because the English doesn't make it so apparent. Of ox or of sheep or goat. Notice it doesn't say unclean animals, it's saying clean animals there. So you're supposed to eat clean animals, and of the organ fat, you're not to eat. That goes to God. That is not permitted for humans to eat, the organ fat. Number 69, Leviticus 7:26. Do not eat blood. And there's some cultures out there, they make little blood cubes and they eat that, or they'll put blood in their meat. They'll put blood in some sort of dish and eat it. The Bible is very clear, you're not to be eating that. And it states, "Moreover, you shall not eat any blood in any of your dwellings, whether of bird or beast." And then 27 adds to this, "Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people." So cut off means you're kicked out. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll die, but being thrown out into the desert could be a death sentence. So you're not to be doing that. And the reason being is it was a pagan culture out there of eating, doing rituals, drinking blood, doing sacrifices with blood, dipping eggs into blood, fertility rituals, all that stuff. It's disgusting and nasty, and God doesn't want us to have any part of that. The life is in the blood, and we are to show respect to it. Number 70, Leviticus 11:11, not to eat any unclean fish, in which it states, "They shall be even an abomination unto you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall have their carcasses in abomination. So no unclean fish, not supposed to eat it. If it has scales, you can eat it. If it doesn't have scales, it's not edible. Plus, if you think about it scientifically, those creatures without scales, they are the cleaners. They clean up the estuaries, they clean up the bottom of the ocean, they absorb the toxins, they eat all the nasty stuff. And so if we were to remove those from the ocean, our oceans will become nasty and toxic. Number 71, Leviticus 11, verse 13. Not to eat any unclean fowl, which it states, and these are which you shall have an abomination among the fowls. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination, the eagle and the ostrich and the osprey. So those are unclean birds. And there are other unclean birds that are not in this section, but we will come in contact with them later. Number 72, Leviticus 11, verse 21, searching for prescribed signs in locusts for eating. Of these you may eat of every flying, creeping thing that goes upon all four, which have legs above their feet, to leap with all upon the earth. So essentially, you can eat grasshoppers and you can eat locusts, is what this verse is talking about. And other insects are not on the table. You cannot eat those. They have to meet this requirement, and pretty much it's just locusts and grasshoppers that are edible. Number 73, Leviticus 11, and we're looking at verse 31, but we need 30 and 29 to understand a little bit more. And this deals with by touching carcasses of 8 creeping creatures, in which it says in verse 29, these also shall be unclean unto you among the creeping things that creep upon the earth, the weasel, the mouse, the tortoise after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. And here's 31. These are unclean unto you among all that creep. It's talking about lizards and reptiles. Whatever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. So the key there is that they're dead. You can touch reptiles, but if they die, they're now considered unclean and can pass that uncleanliness over onto you, in which you'll be needing to take a shower, and you will be unclean until evening, and then after that, you won't be unclean anymore. Number 74, Leviticus 11, verse 34, defilement of food and drink if contacting unclean things, which it states, of all meat which may be eaten, that on which such water comes shall be unclean, that all drink that may be drunk in every such vessel shall be unclean. So if you have an animal that has dropped into the water and you pull it out, that water is unclean. It doesn't matter if you pour it into another vessel, you'll make the vessel unclean as well. And so basically you just need to get rid of that water. Number 75, Leviticus 11, verse 41. Do not eat anything that creeps on the earth. It's talking about reptiles. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. So, we're not to eat reptiles. Plus, they carry a lot of parasites, and they are not safe to be eating. Number 76, Leviticus 11, verse 42. Not to eat living creatures that go on their belly. This also is in the same vein of reptiles, but we have another way of stating it. Whatsoever goes upon its belly, and whatsoever goes upon all four, or whatsoever has feet among all creeping things, reptiles, that creep upon the earth, them you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. So I would say snakes and alligators for sure meet this requirement. We are not to be eating them. They are considered an abomination. And the word abomination in the Hebrew is the most strongest word in the Bible. It is very detestable to God. Number 77, Leviticus 11:43, abominable creatures, which it states, you shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. Don't be making idols, and don't be playing around with unclean animals. They might die, and then you become unclean. Number 78, Leviticus 11:44. Do not eat creeping things that are undefiled. For I am Jehovah, that's Jehovah in the English, God's name, your God, and you shall therefore sanctify yourself, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any matter of creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So basically, he is saying you should just stay away from reptiles. You should just stay away from the creepy crawlies. You should sanctify yourself. You should separate yourself. Those creatures have their jobs, go around, eat up the insects, and clean up the environment, and you should just stay away from them. Number 79, Leviticus 11, verse 8. Defilement by eating or touching certain animal carcasses. See, the whole backdrop behind this clean and unclean thing. God is trying to keep us safe. He's trying to keep us away from diseases and viruses and bacteria and fungal spores and all the nasty stuff that goes along with dead animals. And the verse states, of their flesh shall you not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean unto you. So, this is dealing with an animal that has died. And God is saying, don't go over there and eat it. And don't be using it. And it's unclean. Just go bury it or let the wild animals eat it. Don't touch it. Because you could get sick. You could get some nasty disease that came from you touching a dead animal. So once you start getting into the specifics of God's commandments, you start to unravel the reasons why he said it. And so for someone to say, well, that's been done away with. Okay, so we're supposed to go around playing with dead carcasses now? Is there no safety and reason and logic behind what God is telling us? And of course, nobody would argue against that. It's just common sense. Number 80, Leviticus 11, verse 9, searching for prescribed signs of fish for eating. And these shall you eat of all that are in the waters, whatever has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas, and in the rivers, them you shall eat. So, these fish will be protected, for their scales will cover their body and they won't get toxins. They won't absorb poisons and heavy metals and mercuries and stuff. So they're safer to eat. Now, not all fish with scales are safe to eat, but in today's world, but that is the biblical requirement, is that you eat the ones with the scales because they're going to have less toxins. Number 81, Leviticus 12, verse 2, uncleanliness of a woman after childbirth, in which it states, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a woman have conceived seed, that means, and bore a man's child, then she shall be unclean 7 days according to the days of her separation, for her infirmity shall be unclean. So, in effect, she's technically unclean. She may have had some tearing. She might have been bleeding. Who knows what her circumstances is. So she needs to heal. And she is to be unclean. And so you need to change sheets. You need to be very cautious because it's a very sensitive time for her and you don't want her to catch an infection. Number 82, Leviticus 13, verse 45. On that the leper must be made easily distinguishable. The verse states, and the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, and his head bare, and he shall put a covering upon his upper lip, and shall cry, unclean, unclean. So, what this is stating is that if someone catches leprosy, they have a responsibility to make sure everyone knows that they are sick. When he's walking up and down the street, he needs to cover his lip, his upper lip, and that means he would be covering his mouth. So he covers his mouth, maybe with a cloth or something, and he says, I'm unclean, so then people won't catch the disease. He won't be spreading it. So if you love your neighbor, you will tell him, hey, do not come near me. I could possibly infect you. And so we have a responsibility for that. Notice he doesn't cover his nose. He can still breathe. So let that be a lesson as well. Number 83, Leviticus 13, verse 51. This is on garments contaminated by leprosy. So again, God has thought of so much. He's basically figured out everything and how to give you a healthy, happy, clean, safe, loving life. In which this verse says, and he shall look on the plague on the 7th day, if the plague be spread in the garment, either in the wrap or in the oof or in the skin or in any work that is made of the skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy and is unclean. So technically, the priest would come and they would determine by how the skin looks if it is contagious, if it was growing, if it's getting worse. So we don't use the priest at this point. We use doctors to do that. But the garments are also considered unclean, and that's what this verse is getting at. And I just want to state that in ancient times, the Hebrew word is sarat, and that means skin disease or skin rash. Leprosy is more of like a modern thing. They really didn't have leprosy in the ancient Middle East at that time. Leprosy shows up later in history. So really, it's skin disorder. Number 84, Leviticus 14, verse 44, on a leprous house. Then the priest shall come and look, and behold, the plague be spread in the house. It is a fretting leprosy in the house, and it is unclean. And so this is dealing with leprosy, but really it's not leprosy. This is just the plague of the house. So you have mold, you have some sort of fungus that has broke out in your house, some black growing thing on the walls. And so the priest, or in our case, it wouldn't be the priest, somebody would come check it out. They would see your house is contaminated. This whole house is unclean. And so you need to get out. And then there's a whole process of cleansing or burning the house if it gets too far. So God has really thought of things to keep you safe, and you're not to be living in a contaminated house. Number 85, Leviticus verse 14:9. On that a leper must shave his head, but it shall be on the 7th day that he shall shave all his hair off of his head, and his beard, and his eyebrows, even all his hair he shall shave off, and he shall wash his clothes. Also he shall wash his flesh in water, and he shall be clean. So if you got some sort of disease in camp, and maybe it's leprosy, maybe it's just some crazy skin disease that's going on, you're supposed to shave your head and your beard and get the hair off of you so that you can let everybody know. Everyone can visibly see you and know that this person is sick. Don't go touching them. And they're to wash and to be clean so that their bodies can go on to heal. Means take a bath. Number 86, Leviticus 15 and verse 16. On immersion of a mikvah to become ritually clean. And this verse states, and if any man's seed of copulation goes out from him, then he shall wash all his flesh in water and be unclean until evening. So, what this verse is stating is if a man had relations with a woman and his seed came out of him, he is to wash in water. He is to take a bath and clean himself. So that brings us to the very last one of our listing for part 3. Please join us in part 4 as we will continue going through God's commandments. I want to say thank you all those out there that participate, share, like, subscribe, add a comment. We absolutely love our engagement with our listeners, and we're so grateful for all those who have subscribed and have continued watching our awesome videos. We have so much more planned in the future. I hope these teachings have been a blessing to you, and thank you, and God bless.